There are some people in this world who are simply different. They are born in a small place. They have very little money. The world tells them no again and again. But deep inside, there is a fire that never goes out. No matter how hard life becomes, that fire keeps burning. This is the story of one of those people. This is the story of a young girl from Poland who became the most famous scientist in the world. A woman who worked in the cold and the dark. A woman who discovered things that no one had ever seen before. A woman who proved that talent has no gender, that science has no borders, that when you believe in something with your whole heart, the world cannot stop you. This is the story of Marie Curie. And this story begins, like all great stories, at the very beginning. Warsaw, Poland. November 7th, 1867, the city was cold. The streets were covered in gray snow. The windows of a small apartment glowed with warm yellow light. Inside, a family waited. When the baby arrived, she came into the world quietly. The mother held her close. The father looked down with soft, tired eyes. "Another girl," he said gently. "Yes," the mother replied, "and she will be something special. I feel it." They named her Maria Sklodowska. But one day, the whole world would know her as Marie. Maria grew up in a family that loved learning. Her father, Władysław, was a teacher. He taught mathematics and physics. He believed that knowledge was the most important thing a person could have. More important than money. More important than comfort. Every evening, the family would sit together. The father would read to the children. He would teach them things. He would ask them questions. "Maria," he would say, "what do you think? Why does the sun rise in the east? Why does the river flow downhill? Why does the candle make light?" Little Maria would think very hard. Her big gray eyes would look up at the ceiling. Then she would answer, and her answers were always thoughtful, always careful, always better than you would expect from such a small child. Her father would smile. "Very good, my little one. Very good." Maria loved those moments. She felt safe. She felt seen. She felt like thinking was the most wonderful thing in the world. But life was not always warm and safe. Poland at that time was not a free country. It was controlled by Russia. The Russian rulers were strict. They did not want Polish people to speak their own language freely. They did not want Polish children to learn their own history. They did not want Polish people to think too much or to question too much. Maria's school had a special rule. When the Russian inspector came to visit, the children had to pretend. They had to speak Russian. They had to say they knew nothing about Polish history or culture. They had to hide who they really were. Maria hated this. She was a proud girl. She loved Poland. She loved her language. Pretending was painful, but she did it because her family told her she must be careful. One day, the inspector came to Maria's classroom. He was a tall man with cold eyes. He walked slowly between the desks, looking at each student carefully. "You," he said, pointing at Maria, "tell me the name of our great ruler." Maria stood up slowly. She looked at the inspector. Her hands were shaking just a little, but her voice was steady and clear. She answered in perfect Russian. She said exactly the right thing. The inspector nodded. He moved on to the next student. After the inspector left, Maria sat down and put her head on the desk. Her shoulders shook. She was not crying. She was trying not to explode with anger. Her teacher walked over and put a hand on her shoulder. "I know," the teacher whispered. "I know." Maria looked up. There were tears in her eyes, but her jaw was tight. "One day," she said quietly, "one day, I will do something that no one can take away from me. Something that belongs to me, something real." Her teacher nodded slowly. "Yes, Maria, I believe you will." When Maria was 10 years old, something terrible happened. Her oldest sister, Zofia, became very sick. It was a disease called typhus. In those days, typhus was very dangerous. There was no good medicine. The doctors could not help much. The family watched Zofia get weaker and weaker. They sat by her bed. They held her hand. They prayed, and then Zofia was gone. Maria sat in the corner of the room. She could not speak. She could not cry. She just sat very still and stared at the floor. She was 10 years old, and she had already learned that life could take the people you love. Then, 2 years later, the second terrible thing happened. Maria's mother became sick. She had a disease called tuberculosis. It was a slow sickness. It took a long time, but the ending was the same. Maria was 12 years old when her mother died. The house became very quiet after that. The light seemed different. The warmth was gone. Her father tried to keep the family together. He worked hard. He taught his students. He cooked meals. He made sure the children went to school. But you could see the sadness in his eyes. The kind of sadness that does not go away. Maria pushed her pain deep inside. She told herself she could not waste time being sad. She told herself she had to work. She had to study. She had to become something. For her mother, for her sister, for her father, for herself. She was 12 years old, and she was already the most serious student in her school. By the time Maria was 15, it was clear to everyone that she was extraordinary. She finished school at the top of her class. She won a gold medal. Her teachers said she was one of the best students they had ever seen. But there was a problem, a very big problem. In Poland, under Russian rule, women could not go to university. That was the rule. Simple. Final. Women could learn to read and write. Women could be teachers in small schools. But university, science, medicine? No. Those things were for men. Maria refused to accept this. She heard about something called the floating university. It was a secret school. Polish teachers and students would meet in different apartments, different buildings, moving around so the Russian police would not find them. They taught real subjects, real science, real history, real knowledge. Maria joined immediately. She would go to these secret meetings at night. She would walk through the dark streets, looking behind her, making sure no one was following. She would sit in someone's small apartment with 20 other young people and listen to a teacher talk about chemistry or mathematics. It was dangerous. If the police found them, they could be arrested. They could be sent away to Siberia. But Maria went every week. Nothing could stop her. At one of these meetings, she made a promise with her older sister, Bronya. Bronya also wanted to study. She wanted to be a doctor. But neither of them had the money to go to Paris, where women could study at university, so they made a plan. "I will work first," Maria said. "I will send money to you in Paris. You study medicine. When you finish, you will help me go. Then I will study." Bronya looked at her sister. "That means you will wait many years." "I know," Maria said simply. "Are you sure?" Maria looked back at her with those steady gray eyes. "I am sure." So Maria became a governess. She went to live with a rich family in the countryside. She took care of their children. She taught them lessons. She cooked. She cleaned. She did everything that was asked of her. And every month, she sent part of her small salary to Bronya in Paris. The countryside was lonely. The family she worked for was sometimes kind and sometimes cold. The work was hard. The days were long. But Maria did not give up. In the evenings, after the children were asleep and the house was quiet, Maria would sit at a small table by a candle. She would open her books. She would study mathematics. She would study chemistry. She would study physics. She wrote letters to her father. "I have not stopped dreaming," she wrote. "The books keep me alive. The science keeps me sane. One day, I will be where I am supposed to be." Her father wrote back, He sent her books when he could. He told her about new discoveries in science. He reminded her that she was special, that she had a great mind, that the world needed what she had inside her. Those letters were like food for her soul. One evening, something happened that gave her unexpected joy. The son of the family she worked for, a young man named Kazimierz, began talking to her. He was intelligent. He was curious. He liked science, too. They began to talk in the evenings. They talked about books, about ideas, about the future. Maria, who had been so lonely, began to feel something warm growing in her chest. She began to fall in love. But when the young man told his parents he wanted to marry Maria, they were not happy. "She is the governess," his mother said coldly. "She is not good enough for our family. She has no money. She has no position." The young man was weak. He did not fight for Maria. He listened to his parents. Maria felt the rejection like a punch to the heart. She had trusted this feeling. She had let herself be vulnerable. Now she put those feelings away. She decided something in that moment. She would not look for love to make her feel worthy. She would find her worth through her work, through her mind, through what she created and discovered. She went back to her books with even more intensity. After several long years of waiting and working and saving, the day finally came. Maria arrived in Paris. It was 1891. She was 23 years old. The city was enormous and loud and beautiful. The streets were wide. The buildings were tall. There were cafes and theaters and people everywhere. But Maria did not come for the cafes and theaters. She enrolled at the University of Paris, the famous Sorbonne, to study physics. She was one of very few women in the science department. The men looked at her sometimes with curiosity, sometimes with surprise, sometimes with a kind of cold disrespect. Some of them could not understand why a woman would want to study science. Maria ignored them. She was not there to argue. She was not there to make friends. She was there to learn. She rented a tiny room near the university. It was on the top floor of a building. In the summer, it was hot. In the winter, it was freezing. There was almost no furniture. There was barely enough money for food. Some days, Maria had only chocolate and bread to eat. Some days, she was so cold in her room that she could not sleep. She would pile all her clothes on top of herself for warmth. But she was at the Sorbonne. She was studying. She was finally where she was supposed to be. She threw herself into her studies with everything she had. She sat in the front of every class. She took careful notes. She asked questions that surprised her professors. She spent hours in the library reading. She spent more hours in the laboratory doing experiments. Other students would leave at the end of the day. Maria would stay. The laboratory was quiet at night. The equipment was old and imperfect. But in that quiet, in that imperfect space, Maria began to understand things. She began to see patterns in science that others had not seen clearly. She finished her degree in physics in 1893. She finished at the top of her class. Then she stayed and studied mathematics. She finished that degree at the top of her class, too. People noticed. Her professors talked about her. This young Polish woman, this extraordinary student. One professor introduced her to a colleague of his, a quiet Frenchman who worked in a physics laboratory, a man who was serious about science, a man who cared more about discoveries than about fame or money. His name was Marie Curie. The first time Pierre and Maria met, they talked about science for 3 hours. They talked about magnetism. They talked about crystals. They talked about the nature of matter. They asked each other questions and answered them, and then asked more questions. By the time they said goodnight, both of them knew something important had happened. Pierre had never met a woman like Maria. a woman who was his equal in every way, a woman who saw the world the way he saw it, a woman who loved science with the same kind of deep, serious love that he had. He began to write her letters. "You are a mystery to me," he wrote. "I think about our conversations all day. I think about your ideas. I think about your way of looking at things. I would like very much to know you better." Maria wrote back. She was careful. She had been hurt before. She was not quick to trust. But Pierre was patient. He was not trying to impress her. He was not trying to control her. He simply wanted to be near her mind, near her spirit. He proposed to her, and she said no at first. She was planning to go back to Poland. She was not sure about love. She was not sure about staying in France. But Pierre would not give up. "I would like us to work together," he told her. "I believe we could do great things. Together." Something in those words reached her. Together, not him doing the work and her helping. Together, as equals. She said yes. They were married in 1895. Maria did not wear a wedding dress. She wore a dark blue suit, practical and simple. She said it was better for working in the laboratory. That was Marie Curie. Their life together was not a life of dinners and parties and social events. It was a life of work. Beautiful, passionate, exhausting work. They set up their laboratory. They cooked simple meals. They rode their bicycles in the countryside on summer evenings. They talked about science at the breakfast table and the dinner table, and before sleep. They were deeply happy. Now we come to the most important part of this story. In 1896, a French scientist named Henri Becquerel made a strange discovery. He found that a material called uranium seemed to give off rays of energy all by itself, without any source of light or heat. The rays just came, constantly, from inside the uranium. This was very strange. Science at the time could not explain it. Most scientists looked at this discovery and said, "Interesting." Then they moved on. Marie looked at this discovery and said, "I need to understand this." She decided to study this mysterious phenomenon for her doctoral research. Pierre encouraged her completely. She started testing uranium. She measured the rays it gave off. She invented a special technique to measure them with great precision, using equipment that Pierre had helped create. Then she had a thought. What if uranium was not the only material that did this? What if there were other materials that also gave off this invisible energy? She began testing everything she could find. Different minerals, different compounds, different elements. And she found something extraordinary. There was a mineral called pitchblende. When she tested pitchblende, it gave off more energy than she expected. Much more. Far more than the uranium it contained could explain. She looked at the results again and again. Something was wrong, or something was right. The numbers were too high. She thought carefully. If the uranium in pitchblende cannot explain all this energy, then there must be something else in pitchblende. Something unknown. Something that gives off even more energy than uranium, she told Pierre. He put down what he was doing and looked at her numbers. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I think you may have found something new." Together, they began the work of finding this unknown element. The work was incredibly hard. They did not have a proper laboratory. They worked in an old, leaky shed. In the summer, the shed was hot and suffocating. In the winter, it was freezing. Rain came through holes in the roof. The equipment was minimal, and the work itself was brutal. To find the new element, they had to process enormous amounts of pitchblende. They had to crush it, dissolve it in acids, boil it, separate it, test it, again and again and again. Marie did much of this physical work herself. She stirred boiling liquid with an iron rod for hours. She lifted heavy containers. She breathed in chemical fumes. She had burns on her hands from the acids. She was often tired. She often had headaches, but she did not stop. "I go to the laboratory every day," she wrote in her diary. "I work until I cannot work anymore. Then I go home and sleep. Then I wake up and go back, slowly, through months and then years of this brutal work. They began to isolate the new element. In 1898, they announced their first great discovery. Inside pitchblende, they had found a new element. Marie named it polonium, after her beloved homeland, Poland. It was her way of honoring a country that was not yet free. But the work was not finished because there was still something unexplained. There was still more energy in the pitchblende than polonium alone could explain. There was another unknown element hiding in there. They kept working. In December 1898, they announced their second discovery, a second new element, more radioactive than anything known before. They called it radium. The word Marie used for this phenomenon, this invisible energy pouring from certain materials, was radioactivity. It was a word she invented, a concept she defined. The world had never had a name for this thing before. Now it did, and it came from her. But announcing the discovery was one thing. Proving it beyond all doubt required actually isolating the pure element. Showing the world that radium was real. That took 4 more years. 4 more years of crushing pitchblende and dissolving it and boiling it and separating it. 4 more years in the leaky shed. 4 more years of burns and fumes and exhaustion. By 1902, they had processed over a ton of pitchblende, an enormous, almost unbelievable amount. From all of that pitchblende, they had isolated just a tiny amount of pure radium, less than half a gram, but it was real, and it glowed. Radium gave off a faint blue light in the dark. Marie would sometimes go into the shed at night, just to stand in the dark and watch the gentle blue glow of the jars containing their radium. She said later, it was one of the most beautiful things she had ever seen. The world noticed. In 1903, Marie and Pierre were awarded the Nobel Prize in Physics, along with Henri Becquerel, who had first discovered the strange rays from uranium. It was the greatest prize in science, the most important recognition in the world. And here was the quiet scandal. At first, the Nobel Committee did not want to include Marie. Some of the committee members felt that Pierre alone should get the prize, or Pierre and Becquerel. But not Marie. Pierre found out. He was furious. He wrote to the committee directly. He told them that the work had been done together. He told them that Marie's contribution was equal to or greater than his own. He told them that she had been the one to choose the topic, to make the key theoretical leap, to lead the majority of the hard laboratory work. The committee reconsidered. They included Marie. So Marie Curie became the first woman in history to receive the Nobel Prize. But even then, at the ceremony, at this great moment of triumph, there was still inequality. Women were not allowed to give speeches at the ceremony. Pierre spoke. Marie sat silently. She listened. She was still. She accepted this. But inside, that fire was still burning. She wrote in her diary that night. She wrote about the prize, about the recognition, about the journey to get there. And then she wrote these words. I am among those who think that science has great beauty. A scientist in a laboratory is not only a technician. He or she is also a child placed before natural phenomena that impress her like a fairy tale. She underlined the words, or she. The only edit she made on that page, after the Nobel Prize, life changed. Fame arrived, uninvited. Journalists wanted to interview them. People sent letters from everywhere. Strangers stopped them on the street. The quiet scientists who just wanted to work suddenly became famous. Marie hated it. She was private. She was serious. She did not want to be famous. She wanted to be in the laboratory. Pierre felt the same way. They tried to keep living simply. They still rode their bicycles. They still ate simple food. They still worked, but the attention was constant. It was draining. And then came the worst day of Marie's life, April 19, 1906. It was a rainy afternoon in Paris. Pierre was crossing the street. He was distracted, perhaps thinking about an experiment, the way he always was. A horse-drawn cart came fast around the corner. Pierre did not see it in time. He fell under the wheels of the cart. He died instantly. Marie was at home when the news came. A colleague came to the door. He could not speak at first. He just stood there in the doorway with a look on his face that told her everything before he said a single word. Marie sat down slowly. She did not scream. She did not faint. She just sat and became very still. The world had gone silent. Pierre, her partner, her best friend, her equal, the man she had built her life around, was gone. She wrote in her journal that night. She wrote to Pierre as if he could hear her. "You are gone, and my heart is broken. I don't know how to be in the world without you. We were going to do so much more. We had so many more questions to answer." The grief was enormous. Some people who knew her said she never fully recovered, that something inside her stayed broken after that day. But she did not stop, because there was the work. The work was always there, waiting. Like a faithful friend, the University of Paris asked her to take over Pierre's teaching position, his professorship. For the first time in the university's history, a woman would hold a full professorship at the Sorbonne. On the day of her first lecture, the hall was completely full. Students, professors, journalists, members of the public, everyone wanted to see this moment. Mary walked in quietly. She sat down. She arranged her notes. The room was completely silent. Then she spoke. She began exactly where Pierre had left off. The same topic, the same line of thought. Continuing his work, continuing their work. When she spoke those first words, the audience erupted in applause. Marie paused. She waited for the noise to stop. Then she continued, her voice steady, her eyes on her notes, doing what she had always done, working. In the years after Pierre's death, Marie continued to achieve what seemed impossible. She built a world-class laboratory. She trained students from many countries. She helped young scientists find their way, especially young women who had been told that science was not for them. She corresponded with the greatest scientists in the world. Albert Einstein became a friend. They met at conferences and talked for hours about the nature of reality and matter and energy. Einstein once wrote about her. He said she was the only person he knew who had not been corrupted by fame. And then came 1911. The Nobel Prize Committee announced their decision. Marie Curie would receive the Nobel Prize in Chemistry for the isolation of pure radium and her studies of the element. She had already won one Nobel Prize in 1903 in physics. Now she had a second Nobel Prize in a different field of science. No person in history had ever won two Nobel Prizes before. She was the first, and she remains, to this day, the only person to have won Nobel Prizes in two different sciences. At the ceremony, she gave her own speech this time. She stood at the podium, small and serious, with her gray hair and her simple dress and her calm eyes. She spoke about radium, about radioactivity, about the nature of discovery, about how science belongs to everyone, about how it is built by many hands over many generations. She did not speak about herself as extraordinary. She spoke about the work. She said, "I am one of those who think that science has great beauty." And you could feel in that room that she meant it completely. But even the greatest triumphs come with shadow. Marie had been working with radioactive materials for nearly 2 decades. Every day, In the laboratory, she handled radium. She carried test tubes of it in her pockets. She stored it near her desk. She breathed the air around it constantly. No one knew at that time how dangerous radiation was. The invisible rays from these materials could damage the human body slowly, over years. They could destroy the blood cells. They could cause disease. Marie began to feel unwell. She was tired more easily than before. Her hands hurt. She had problems with her eyes. She ignored it, mostly, or she pushed through it. There was always work to be done. During the First World War, she showed another side of her extraordinary character. She understood that soldiers were dying in the field hospitals because doctors could not see the damage inside their bodies. They could not find the bullets and pieces of shrapnel inside the wounded men. Without seeing inside, they could not operate effectively. Marie knew that X-rays could help. X-rays could show the inside of the body. She personally helped design and build mobile X-ray units, small vehicles that could drive to the front lines. She called them petites curies, little curies. She trained women to operate these X-ray units. She sometimes drove them to the front herself. She was in areas close to the fighting, helping doctors see inside the bodies of wounded soldiers. It is estimated that her mobile X-ray units helped treat over 1 million soldiers during the war. 1 million people. She did not do this for recognition. She did it because it needed to be done, and she was the person who knew how to do it. After the war, she continued her work. She raised her daughters, Irene and Eve. She trained them both. She spent time with them in the evenings, telling them stories, answering their questions, encouraging their curiosity. Irene grew up to become a scientist herself. She was brilliant. She reminded people of her mother. And in 1935, Irene also won the Nobel Prize in Chemistry with her own husband. 2 generations of women in one family, both Nobel Prize winners. Marie lived just long enough to see Irene receive that prize. She wept with pride. Near the end of her life, Marie was very ill. The decades of working with radioactive materials had damaged her blood. She had a disease in her bone marrow. Her body could no longer make healthy blood. She spent time in a sanatorium in the mountains, trying to rest. But even there, she had scientific papers with her. Even there, she was reading and thinking and scribbling notes. She did not know how to stop. She had never known how to stop. She wrote a letter to Irene near the end. Do not let the stupid things of life discourage you. Work is the best remedy. When I feel sad or lost, I go to the laboratory. The experiments are always there. The questions are always there. They do not judge. They do not reject. They only ask you to look more carefully. On July 4th, 1934, Marie Curie passed away. She was 66 years old. She died from a plastic anemia caused by years of exposure to radiation. She left behind 2 Nobel Prizes. She left behind the discovery of 2 elements. She left behind the concept of radioactivity that changed medicine, science, and the world forever. She left behind a daughter who was a Nobel Prize winner, grandchildren who were scientists. She left behind a laboratory that bears her name, an institute that continues to do research. She left behind a world that was changed because she had lived in it. Her notebooks to this day are kept in special lead-lined boxes in France because after all these years, they are still radioactive, still giving off the invisible energy that Marie spent her life studying. To read them, you must wear protective clothing and sign a waiver saying you understand the risk. Even her possessions are still alive with the mystery she spent her life exploring. So what do we learn from the life of Marie Curie? We learn that where you begin does not decide where you end. She was born in a country that was not free. She was poor. She was a woman in a time when women were told they had no place in science. She lost her mother and her sister when she was still a child. She was rejected in love. She worked in terrible conditions. She faced doubt and inequality her entire life. And yet, she discovered two elements that had never been found before. She named a phenomenon that changed all of science. She won 2 Nobel Prizes in 2 different sciences. She helped save 1 million soldiers in a war. She raised a daughter who also won the Nobel Prize. How did she do all of this? She did it by working, not just sometimes, not just when she felt like it, not just when conditions were perfect, but every day, even when she was cold, even when she was tired, even when she was heartbroken, even when she was sick. She went back to the laboratory and she worked. She believed in what she was doing. She believed that the work mattered, even when no one else could see why yet. She kept going when others would have stopped. She also showed us the power of partnership. Pierre believed in her completely. He fought for her recognition. He shared the work as a true equal. When you find people who believe in you like that, hold on to them. And she showed us that curiosity is one of the most powerful forces in the universe. She was not interested in the answer. She was interested in the question. She was interested in the mystery. The uranium that gave off energy by itself, the pitch blende that was more active than it should be, these things made her ask why. And that simple question, asked with enough patience and enough work, changed the world. There is one last image I want to leave you with. It is a cold evening in Paris. The year is 1902. Marie is in the shed. It is very late. The children are asleep in the apartment. Pierre is somewhere in the house. Marie is alone. She goes to the shelf where the glass jars stand. Inside each one are small amounts of their precious, hard-won radium, the result of years of crushing and dissolving and separating and testing and never giving up. She turns off the lamp. The shed goes dark, and then the jars begin to glow. A soft, faint, beautiful blue light in the darkness. Marie stands very still. She watches the light. She thinks about what that light means, about the invisible energy pouring out of that tiny amount of matter, about the secrets still hidden inside the atom, about how much more there is to understand. She stands there for a long time, just a woman, alone in a cold shed, watching the faint blue glow of a discovery that will change history. She does not know yet that this same glow will one day shorten her life. She only knows that it is beautiful. She only knows that there is still so much to learn. And she cannot wait to begin. This was the story of Marie Curie, a woman who refused to let the world decide her limits. A woman who worked in the dark and brought new light to all of humanity. Thank you for listening. Keep learning. Keep asking questions. Keep going, even when the way is hard, because somewhere in the darkness, there is always a glow waiting for you to find it.